Hello and welcome to Games as Lit 101. As video games have developed and become increasingly complex, the medium has continued to push the boundaries of how much freedom players can be given. Some games allow the player to alter the narrative in major ways. Others give them a huge world they can explore at their leisure. The idea of open worlds, open stories, and unlimited possibilities has become more and more popular as the medium of video games develops. But with that popularity has also come something like disdain for the old ways, if you will. People play a game like Skyrim, where they can go anywhere and do anything they want, but then when they play a game like The Last of Us, which ushers players through environments and plot points they have no say in, they end up feeling restricted and they don't like the game as much just because it doesn't have that open world. Seriously, I've worked at GameStop and I've seen plenty of people return great games that are linear, like The Last of Us, just because they weren't open world, or people who come in, ask for our recommendations, but will only buy something if we compare it to Skyrim. Skyrim specifically, even, for some reason. And I can't really pretend to be neutral on this issue for the sake of this video. This is a problem. It's actually a pretty big problem, partially because, of course, with how the gaming community works, it can't just be something that a couple people do, or something that's just based on preferences and what people like to play. It's a huge tendency within the gaming community to devalue games that don't have giant open worlds to explore, or a lot of variety in how the story can turn out in the end. So I'm going to talk about why that's wrong. But first, I need to put out a disclaimer because otherwise people are gonna comment saying I hate open world games or something stupid like that, and that's not true whatsoever. Open world games are awesome. I love the freedom of exploring Morrowind, I love the different endings in Chrono Trigger, and I love finding new vistas and building new things in Minecraft. I have absolutely nothing against games that are open in structure and narrative. But I do have a problem with the way we tend to find a cool new thing and then parade it around as the only good way to do things. Because yeah, open world games are great, but they're not the only or even the best way to do video games, because they serve a pretty specific purpose, and linear games do too. A general principle of interactive design, be it story design or game design, is that the more control is given to the player, the less control the creator has over their experience. Traditionally speaking, stories are very carefully crafted, with each of their elements there for a reason and meaning something, all culminating in a statement or at least some concept or idea that the creator wanted to explore. Allowing the player to alter the way the story turns out really jeopardizes that concept. Now, of course, this show is primarily concerned with storytelling, but there's a similar effect in game design as well. A linear game like Uncharted is tightly paced and keeps you experiencing different, interesting scenarios the designers built for you. Comparatively, a game like Fallout 4 has the player exploring and doing whatever they please much of the time, which, in a way, puts the player's engagement as much in their hands as the game's creators. In both gameplay and narrative, many players seem to be viewing linearity as too restricting, that if a game doesn't let them play the game however they want, or alter the way the story turns out, then the game isn't effectively using their interactivity to its advantage. As a result, we often see the word linear used as a negative term. Any game that doesn't allow a lot of player freedom will get a decent amount of this criticism from gamers who love sprawling RPGs, and any story that doesn't allow the player to change its outcome gets this criticism from a decent amount of gamers who expect a story they can be a meaningful part of. Whether or not this is legitimate depends on what it is that linearity does to a game, and what it doesn't. The discussion around this issue is, as it often is, usually more simple than the actual issue is, so we're going to try and identify what it is that linearity does and doesn't do for a game, and while we're at it, we'll be talking about both narrative and gameplay. So then, what does linearity do for a video game? Firstly, it allows the game maker to effectively craft a specific experience for the player. Traditionally, art gains meaning through a creator talking to an audience, and linearity allows that creator to most effectively create a detailed, carefully designed experience for their audience. Secondly, in a similar vein, it puts the responsibility for crafting interesting encounters and story elements in the hands of the creator. In a more open game, it's easy for the player to pick a playstyle or a story route and stick with it through the entire game. But a more linear game can more effectively guide the player through a greater variety of situations by controlling those situations the player finds themselves in and the resources they have access to. And finally, it greatly increases thematic consistency. A story told by a writer will have its topics and themes, and they'll act as the creator writes them. Whatever they intend their story to say, they can craft the whole experience around that statement. Allowing the player to alter it, even in minor ways, can change or jeopardize that meaning, so a linear story allows the game's creator to make the statement they want and design the game to most effectively say what they want to say. But of course, anything like this comes with both pros and cons, abilities and limitations. So then, what limitations come with linear storytelling and game design? Well, the most obvious is that the player doesn't have much input about how the game progresses. Any good game will allow a series of interesting choices within gameplay, but there's a big difference in the variety and amount of choices available to you in a game like Far Cry or Fallout, and a game like Super Mario World or Crash Bandicoot. The latter games are great, of course, but there are generally less options available to you when considering how to proceed through it. There's also less replay value. This entire concept of replay value is actually kind of dubious, and I'll be talking about it in a full episode sometime soon, but it is true that a linear game will play out more or less in the same way every time you play it. The more freedom you have, the more variety in your experiences each time you return to the game. And finally, the same thing is true of the story. A linear video game story will play out the same way each time you play the game, so any replays after the first will offer the same basic experience. Just from that, it should be obvious that linearity has a place in video games. Whether it's good or bad isn't dependent on the nature of linearity itself, but on the specific game and how it uses that linearity, whether that fits well within its goals and presentation. I should note that linear storytelling does not eliminate or even lessen the impact of interactivity on a video game story. We've talked a good deal on this show about minor narrative interactivity, and that concept is very important here. There are a number of ways for video game stories to use interactivity to make them more powerful, aside from allowing the player to change that story. So then, if linearity is only good or bad depending on the context of the game it's being used in, when does linearity improve an experience, and when does it detract from it? The short answer is to look at the elements of linearity that we just established and determine whether a given game benefits from the pros or suffers from the cons. Minecraft, for instance, would unquestionably suffer from these principles of linearity. It's not trying to make a statement, and the entire point of the game is that the player is entirely undirected and can do whatever they want, however they want. You could certainly make a different game in the Minecraft universe and make it however you want, and it could be great, but linearity wouldn't have much of a place in Minecraft itself. Other games, like Max Payne 2 or Enslaved Odyssey to the West, benefit greatly from being tailored to the artist's vision. They provide specific, carefully constructed challenges for the player and take them through a meaningful story that likely wouldn't retain its same level of value had the players been responsible for its progression and conclusion. But of course, we're talking about something of a spectrum here, so many games include, or at least would benefit from, a mixture of both linearity and non-linearity. Many modern shooters use cheap design tactics to force the player to play like they want them to, like when Medal of Honor Warfighter kills you with an otherwise really weak sniper if you try to move on without destroying the building he's in. A bit more gameplay freedom would have improved this sequence tremendously. But on the other hand, poorly designed morality systems in some games can really handicap the game thematically, and they really would have been better had they simply taken the player through a set story. And of course, if a game makes a habit of generally being very linear or very open, then it can end up feeling kind of disjointed if it goes against those principles later on. The ending of Watch Dogs comes to mind here, where the protagonist made a really important decision without any input from the player, despite the player's input and freedom being very important in the game up until that point. So what do we take from all this in the end? Well, it's important to understand that linearity is not an inherently bad thing in games. It can be a very good thing for games, and there are some other situations where it really just doesn't belong. But in any case, it makes no sense to criticize a game just for being linear. Instead, we should be looking at a game's design and intent and determining whether linearity is helpful towards the goals the game is trying to achieve. All of this meshes pretty well with this show's general premise, that we should be looking more closely at the games we play and appreciating their complexity, instead of just identifying broad concepts like linearity and then judging a game's quality based on how well those concepts fit within our personal preferences. So if you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe to the channel and make sure to check the description for links to Games as Literature on Facebook and Twitter, as well as Patreon in case you really like the show and want to give me money to help make it better. We'll be taking a break next week to celebrate Thanksgiving, so I hope you all have as much fun with your families as we will. The following week, I'll be analyzing the Stanley Parable, so until then, class dismissed.